Hey everybody, it's Charles, your hobby hero, coming at you today with another set review. Now that the full set is spoiled, we're going to be reviewing Ruby today, and I think you may be in for some surprises with this review. If you haven't already though, please hit that subscribe button down in the bottom corner. I do appreciate it. I do put out regular content about the hobbies that I love the most, with this channel being dedicated to the card games that I played. Now, there are no surprises. I have not been a big fan of red. Now, there have been some decks that have emerged that have kind of highlighted some of the top end for the red cards. But overall, this is a color that I am pretty cool on. So just go into the review knowing that. If you have another experience with red, I would love to hear your experience down in the comment section below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on in. Okay, so we're back here on Dreamborn.Inc. We've got our cards sorted from lowest cost to highest cost for Ruby. We're going to go through this list real quick and talk about whether they are limited playable, standard playable, great staples, overall opinions on those cards. Starting first with a Minnie Mouse. She's a 1-drop inkable 1/3 with 1 lore. These stats are probably fine if you're playing limited. Constructed, it really is too small. She's not going to trade favorably with very many characters, and 1 lore generation just isn't going to get it done for your 1-drop spot. She is inkable, which makes her fine for limited, but nothing else really past that. Kind of similar with Sergeant Tibbs, slightly better in my opinion. That 2 strength allows him to trade a little bit more favorably, especially when you get to a later game. 2 damage is much more relevant than 1. Still only 1 lore generation though, so probably not constructed playable. Fan the Flames is an action at 1 and inkable. Ready chosen character, they can't quest for the rest of this turn. I do not actually like this action card. I do like this effect, which we'll see later on another character that I think is really good. But as an action and a one-time use action at that, I don't think this is playable. One thing to keep in mind though, is since it is chosen character, you can use it on your opponent's bodyguard characters to restand those and swing past those, which makes the effect kind of cute. Still not worth a spot in probably either your limited or your constructed deck. Next one up is He's Got a Sword, 1-drop action that is inkable. Chosen character gets +2 strength this turn. This is strictly just a downgrade from Vicious Betrayal. As a one-time use, I don't believe this is going to make standard play, and in the constructed, or limited rather, you can use this for some more favorable trades, but again, it's just a downgrade from the Vicious Betrayal, and definitely not something I would prioritize in a limited format. Alright, first card I am kind of excited about in Ruby here, that'd be Shield of Virtue, another 1-drop inkable item, which is already makes it fit very nicely into the item deck with Maurice as a cantrip for 1. Also has the ability Fireproof. You exert it and pay 3 ink. You can ready a chosen character. They can't quest for the rest of this turn. Again, I really like this ability, but now we have it on something where it is reusable. In red, this is giving you double use out of your characters. You can quest first and then challenge, or challenge, and if it survives, challenge again, making this card super impactful for limited and good enough, I would say, for constructed play as well. Again, keep in mind, you can ready your opponent's bodyguards too, so if they are trying to protect one of their key pieces there, a lot of times people forget that this can target their own characters. You can restand their bodyguard and then swing right past it as well. Big fan of this card. I think it will see constructed play, and in limited, it is an absolutely just a powerhouse of a card as long as you can afford that 3 ink. Again, if you're far behind, this card is not going to help you catch up a ton, but if you're fighting for control of the board, this thing can certainly make a huge impact in those scenarios. And then we've got Donald Duck in our 2-drop spot here. He is a 2 inkable, 2 strength, 3 willpower, 1 lore generator. For limited, I really like these 2 3s at 2. They trade pretty favorably with all the 1 and 2 drops, and even some 3 drops and above because of that 2 strength. Survives a lot of the smaller removal like Fire the Cannons, the Tinkerbell, etc. So I really like this one in limited. I think in constructed playable though, 1 lore and your 2-drop spot is just not where you want to be, especially since we don't have a shift Donald Duck to really support this guy late game. Probably will not see constructed play, but limited, I really do like these 2 3s for 2. For next one up, we've got Gaston, is a 2-drop inkable 4/2 with Reckless, which means he cannot quest and has to challenge each turn if possible. I do not like this design at all because, one, without Rush, your opponent is going to see it coming, and two, these high strength but low willpower just about means he's only ever going to trade with one character. It's only going to be a 1-for-1 advantage, and without Rush, your opponent's going to really get to choose what that is more so than you. They're going to leave their big guy back and make you swing into something unfavorable like a Flynn Rider or Cruella de Vil or Cheshire Cat, cards you don't really want to be swinging into. You have to swing when this guy has Reckless. Not a fan of these in Constructed, not a fan of this in Limited. Limited, you don't have a lore generator here, and without Rush, he's not a very effective removal spell either. We have LeFou, though, who is quite good. I like this one quite a bit. He's a 2-drop inkable 2/2 with 1 lore generation, who again has that Fan the Flames ability built into him to restand one of your guys, get double use out of them. Stats are decent enough for a 2-drop as it is, and then to have this ability to come in and get 2 uses out of one of your characters for the turn, I think is very good. I think this guy will be a Constructed staple as well as a Limited staple as well. No real reason why you wouldn't want this guy in your deck. Unfortunately, that's not the case for this card. Cut to the chase. 2-drop inkable action. Chosen character gains Rush this turn. This card is not playable in any format. If it's already in your limited pool, it is only ever going to be inked, most likely. The fact that Rush characters cannot quest for lore just means this is going to turn one of your non-Rush characters into a pseudo removal spell, which hopefully doesn't get you 2-for-1 in the process. It also costs 2, which means you're not gonna be able to play anything on curve. You're gonna have to play something that's 2 under the ink threshold at that point in time, which just makes this card terrible. If this card had been free to play, inkable, or also gave the attacker +2 strength or something like that, maybe. But as it stands, this card is not playable in Limited or Constructed. Similarly, with the next one up here is another 2-cost action that is inkable called Tangle. Each opponent loses a lore. Outside of like a really big multiplayer game that this card's just going to aggravate the whole table for a pretty minimal effect, this card is not good. 1 lore, and it could just be you playing a 2-drop that can generate lore the following turn. You're not going to be playing so many of these effects to make a substantial difference at the end of the game. The number of times an opponent losing 1 lore is going to be the difference between you winning the game and losing the game. Is so few, as there's just not that many cards in play late game that only generate 1 lore. The math just doesn't make this card make sense to me, other than just a fun multiplayer type of game where you're hitting a whole table of 8 people for 1 lore. And then, again, just making everybody mad at you for no real reason. We have a Boo next, moving into our 3-drops. And our first 2 lore generator for red. He is a 3/2, 2 lore generator for 3 and is inkable. I think he's perfectly fine in Limited, especially in Ruby, since he is one of the better lore generators. For Constructed play, though, I think he's just too fragile with that 2 willpower. He is going to get traded up to by the 1 and 2 drops quite easily. Fire the Cannons takes care of him quite easily. There's no Bigaboo to shift into this guy, so there's really just no suitable reason to play this in Constructed, but for 2 lore generation, he's perfectly fine, especially being inkable in any Limited format. Moving over to Aladdin, after a Boo, we've got another 3-drop inkable. He's a 2/2, 1 lore generator with the ability Improvise. When you play this character, each opponent loses 1 lore. Again, we've talked about this. This ability really is nothing impressive. Stats-wise, he is definitely understated for a 3-drop. The reason why this guy will get played and is already getting played is because he is in color with the 7-drop Aladdin that shifts for 5, which makes this guy just the only reason why you would play this guy. It's a very unimpactful effect, but being able to drop that 7-drop on turn 5 with Rush, especially with that one's ability, which we'll get into here in a little bit, is very, very good, and the sole reason this guy will see any play in Constructed. And Limited, the fact that he's inkable, his stats aren't terrible. Probably would play him even if you don't have the 7-drop. Over here we got Peter Pan, 3-drop, uninkable, 3 strength, 2 willpower, 1 lore generator with Rush. We talk about pseudo removal spells and bad ones at that. We have one right here. It is not inkable, which I think completely eliminates this card from being playable. It has Rush, but really doesn't trade very favorably with anything. It's just kind of a bad removal spell. It does have lore, so there is that scenario where you can generate with it, but again, it's going to be traded with unfavorably. I mean, you're probably good enough to play in limited as kind of a have-to removal spell, but definitely not constructed viable. I think there's a Tinkerbell and Emerald that can give him +1 strength, which makes him slightly better as a removal spell, but it's color locking you for that combination, and really just not worth it in my opinion. Another one here, Poison Apple 3, uninkable. It's an item with the ability 1 ink, banish this item, exert chosen character, which is absolutely terrible and unplayable. It does have a secondary effect though. If the princess character is chosen, banish her instead. Now there are plenty of princess characters that are getting played to where this card will most likely always have a target. However, there are plenty of decks that are not playing princess characters at all. And even in the decks that do have princess characters, I don't think I like this card. The fact that it is not inkable means there are going to be matchups where it's completely dead. And then the fact that it's basically 4 ink to get rid of a character when you've got a 5 ink removal spell in this set, or this color that is not conditional. I just don't think this has a place at all. The fact that it's rare is kind of odd as well, because it's just a bad card. Very few of the princesses cost as much as this removal spell does, so there's not really any opportunity to generate value in this, even the best case scenario, outside of just not having anything to play on turn 3, and it can just sit out there and wait for that 1 ink to banish something. Next up, we've got Elsa, the Ice Surfer, 4-drop inkable. She is a 3/4, 1 lore generator. Pretty understated compared to other colors. I guess not terrible for red. That's no Blizzard ability. Basically, whenever you play an Anana card, she restands but can't quest again for the rest of the turn. Pretty terrible effect. It color locks you into purple because that's the only Ana we have currently is in purple. And with only 1 lore generation and not particularly beefy stats, the restanding is pretty pointless outside of just keeping her alive. You know, being able to quest for 1 or challenge and then restand and just finish the turn standing. Otherwise, there's really no way to abuse it. If she had a bigger stat line, playing multiple Anas in a turn to untap her multiple times while she challenged could be neat. But 3/4, she's probably not going to survive more than 2 challenges anyways, possibly not even 1, depending on the board state. Again, she's inkable, probably good enough to play in limited because of that, but in a constructed format, I would not touch this at all. Moving on to Pongo, old rascal. He's a 4-drop inkable 2/3, 2 lore generator. Again, it's fairly rare for red to get more than 1 lore, so puts him ahead of most lore generators in this set. He does have evasive, which is going to make him very, very strong for limited. If red had enough support for as a lore generating color, I think we could see more of these evasive guys see play. But as it stands, I don't think he has a home in constructed. But in limited, this guy is very, very strong, coming down on 4 and being very hard for most decks to deal with, and generating 2 lore a turn as sometimes just enough to run away with the game, no pun intended, on its own. Very much like this guy, very high focus in red if you're in limited format as well. Next up is Scar, the Fiery Super. He's a 5 strength, 3 willpower, 1 lore generator. For 4, he was inkable. I do not like this card at all. I think the only argument anybody could make for it is that it allows you to go up and to shift into the bigger Scar later on, but I don't like that Scar at all. Spoilers for the end of the clips here. This guy's just not good. He trades up a bit. However, he's not going to survive that trade with only 3 willpower on his side and only having 1 lore as well. He's not going to be doing much more. If he had Rush, this card is absolutely playable. He's going to trade up quite a bit. I think you could even give Reckless to him if you can slap Rush on there. Unfortunately, this guy is just Not strong enough stats for what they want him to do, especially coming in at turn 4. Just have better options, not even in consideration for constructed, but honestly, this guy's barely even fringe playable and limited, just because without rush, they're going to see this guy coming a mile away. Sword of Truth is next. This one is an item 4-drop. Banish this item, banish chosen villain character. Now, I could see this actually seeing some play in constructed, as the ramp decks, pretty much their entire top end is villainous. So this allows you to remove 7 and 9 drops for 4. Pretty good value on that end. There's no activation cost once it gets in play either. It is uninkable, so there's a limited number of these that you could run. And since it is conditional, you kind of run the risk of it. Villains are probably close to 50% of the cards that are getting played right now, so it's not as bad as the Poisoned Apple, which was princesses only, but it has no secondary effects. So if they don't have a villain, it doesn't do anything. So in limited, probably good enough just as a removal, especially since a lot of the big bads in this game are really hard to deal with if you don't have just straight banish spell, but not something I would load up on in constructed or limited in my deck. We have Captain here, 5-drop, inkable, 6/5 monster with 1 lore generation, vanilla character here. Now, in limited, this guy is an absolute beast. This stat line pretty much guarantees he is going to be a 2-for-1 in almost every single scenario. Just that alone makes him a powerhouse. The fact that he's inkable and has any lore generation is just kind of icing on the cake. Most times this guy's going to be turning sideways to deal with their opposing characters. Very strong card in limited. Other side of that though, constructed, this guy just does not do enough. With 1 lore generation, he's not really much of a threat. He obviously has huge stats, but your opponent's going to see it. Should have ways to deal with that in a constructed format so that you're not generating a ton of extra value with just the stats alone. But in limited, absolutely love this guy. The fact that he's inkable means you can pretty much take as many copies as you want and not run a risk of it being too much. We got Goofy Daredevil here, 5 inkable, 3/4 evasive character with 2 lore generation, very similar to Pongo. Unfortunately, stats don't matter a ton on evasive characters, and therefore the fact that he just cost 1 more and makes the same amount of lore pretty much makes him just a slight downgrade from Pongo, in my opinion. I think you still play both of them in limited. Again, if there's not a place for Pongo in constructed, I definitely don't think that there's a place for Goofy. But they're basically identical in terms of stats, because the 3/4 and the 2/3 with only being able to be challenged by other evasive characters and how few of those there are, they're really pretty much the same card, and that 5 is just going to keep you a turn behind versus a Pongo. So if you have an opportunity to pick one or the other, Pongo would be my priority. All right, now we got Maui, 5-drop, inkable, 6/5, rush reckless. They finally got one of these guys right. This guy is an absolute monster at 5. He is not a character. I know it says he's a character, but he is not. He is a removal spell. And that's kind of how you have to view him. He is going to come in, he is going to smash into something completely unexpected, and in all likelihood survive that encounter to do it again. He is probably always going to be a 2-for-1, which makes this guy one of the best removal spells that we have in the game right now. Again, you got to look at him through different lenses though, because he does not generate lore. He is not in the same category. He's much more comparable to Dragonfire than he is to Moana right here. And this guy right here is an absolute beast of a removal spell. Highly like him in constructed, very much like him in limited as well. This guy is going to be in a deck very, very often, and just tons and tons of value built into this guy. Probably my favorite card in red, so definitely so far, but maybe overall, just a ton of value in this guy right here. Moana is next, 5-drop, inkable, similar to Maui, and that's about where the similarities end. She's a 2/6, 2 lore generation, pretty understated for a 5-drop, not terrible for a red 5-drop, I guess, stats-wise, but across the other colors, like, you're just not going to play this stats alone. Her ability might as well be a blank, but just in case you didn't know, you play her. If there's a character Taka in play, you can banish that character Taka. There are two different Takas. One is good, the other one is terrible. And even the good one is probably not going to be in a large enough number of decks to have this ability ever really be relevant. So she is effectively a vanilla 2/6 2-lore generator for 5, which is just not playable really in anything. The fact that she's inkable, you know, you can include her in your limited deck, and if you blow your opponent out after they play their Taka with this, I'm sure it would be worth the stories alone at that point. Next up is Mulan, 5-drop, inkable, 4/5, 1-lore generator. I was really excited about this card initially when I saw it. Now that the full spoiler is out, I am not. And that's because of this ability here where she leads by example. During your turn, when she banishes a character that she challenged, your other characters get +1 lore generation this turn, which sounds really good on paper. Unfortunately, she doesn't have Rush. Unfortunately, Red is terrible at lore generation as it is. And unfortunately, she's got to challenge and banish the character before that ability triggers. So your opponent is going to have all the information they need to make an educated decision about how to deal with this card. She comes in at 5, which honestly is just not enough by that turn of the game. That's kind of like the turning point of the games. Your turn 5 and your turn 6 drops are where the majority of the power is coming in a lot of these decks. This is just not getting it. If Red had a more advantageous lore generation and she could come in at 5 and kind of be that swing to get over the hump and finish the game off, I would absolutely put this card higher on that list. Unfortunately, they can't. Red really can't contribute to a lore generating deck at all, as we've seen through the list here. They really just don't have the lore generators to do that kind of play style. And as such, I don't think she's constructed playable right now. That obviously could change in the future and future expansions. Limited, she's probably fine just because she's a 4/5, and if she squeaks out an extra 3 or 4 lore over the course of the game with this ability, that's also very good. But in constructed, I don't think she's going to make the cut. Unlike the next card here, which is Dragonfire. It is uninkable, but that doesn't matter because you're never going to want to ink it anyways. 5-drop, straight up banish chosen character. This is going to be a 4 of in any deck that's playing red. This is going to be as many copies as you can get of it in limited formats. This card is never going to be bad. It is always going to deal with a character, no matter its size, other than having Ward. This is your kind of answer. It is the staple removal spell that we've got right now, kind of your stereotypical where to base the rankings off the other ones. And this is the big one here. I think everyone who's playing the game and experiencing it knows the value of this card, but just so it doesn't go without saying, this card is very good in any format that you're going to get it in. Unlike this one here, which is Rapunzel, the letting down her hair, 6-drop, uninkable, 5/4, 2-lore generator. When you play the character, each opponent loses 1 lore. We've talked about this ability already. I don't think this ability is worth very much. Unfortunately, the game designers did, making this thing a 6-drop and uninkable to boot. She has a decent body for limited play. Like, she can turn sideways, and with 2 lore generation, like, it's not something that you can just leave alone on the field. Constructed playable, she is far from it. Really not even in consideration, given the power that, like I said, comes from the 6-drop spot throughout the other colors, and even this one here. Limited playable, probably fine. Not too many copies, though, because she is 6 and she is uninkable. Stitch here, on the other hand, is inkable at the 6-drop spot, and he is a 4/6, 3 lore generating monster. If Red were playing a lore generating game, this guy would be constructed viable. Unfortunately, Red right now is basically just a splash color for ramp decks. And really, they're zipping right past this 6-drop spot. So unfortunately, he doesn't have much of a home right now. I do think he is a huge limited bomb, though. These 3 lore generators are enormous bombs for limited format, and Stitch is no exception. I think you play as many copies as you can in limited. And again, only way this guy sees constructed play is probably in future sets if we can get kind of a shift into some kind of lore generation win condition for Red. Taka here, 6-drop, non-inkable, 8/6, Reckless, again, no rush makes this card almost useless. I don't even think you can play this card in limited because it is uninkable, and so many times it's just going to be bad. It's just going to sit on your opponent's side of the field. If she trades favorably with their big bomb, they're just not going to attack with that big bomb. They'll turn a smaller character sideways and force you to attack it, or expend other resources to deal with it. Like, they're going to see whatever you want to do with this card coming, and they're going to play around it. Like, it needed to have rush, maybe make it a 6/6 and give it rush, but rush Reckless 8/6 uninkable. It's definitely not limited or constructed playable, and probably not limited playable because it's not going to help you win. Your best bet is your opponent forgets that it's on the board, and you can trade with their huge bomb, and you traded your 6-drop for maybe their 7-drop. Otherwise, card's just garbage. Don't like it at all. I'm not sure what they were thinking design-wise. They've got Maui up here at 5, who just runs circles around. This guy is inkable. This one's not inkable and has no rush. I just don't get it. We have Tigger up here, kind of similar with Goofy as before. He's 2 lore generation evasive. That's the important thing on this guy. His stats really don't matter as much because he has evasive. Just means he's a more expensive version again. So, I mean, even though he's bigger, I would rate Pongo as probably the best one we've seen so far, then Goofy, then Tigger, just because of that difference. 6 is a lot in this game. I know I've said it before, but 6 is a lot, and you really just need more than 2 lore generation on a 4/4 body at 6, unfortunately, even with evasive. Then we've got Aladdin here. We talked about him a little bit earlier on. 7-drop inkable. He's a 5/5, respectable body for 7-drop. He has 2 lore generation and shift 5, which means he can drop in on that 3-drop Aladdin we looked at earlier on turn 5, and will come in dry, so he will be able to quest and challenge. And challenge is most likely what he's going to do. Because of this ability here, Daring Exploit, during your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, you gain 2 lore and your opponent loses 2 lore. So he's a 4 lore swing when he banishes a character in a challenge, which is huge. And then we have a lot of cards like the Shield that we looked at earlier and LeFou that can restand him to where you can get multiple challenges in a turn, which is just insane, possibly making this guy an 8 lore swing in 1 turn. Just monster stats. Now, the problem is at 7 cost, he is a bit cumbersome. They're going to see him coming and be holding characters back until they can trade favorably with him. 7 is up there. Most decks can't naturally get to 7 on their own. Shift is also kind of risky because in a constructed format, people are going to see that 3-drop Aladdin and know exactly why he's in your deck. Whereas in limited, they may just assume you're playing the 3-drop Aladdin for lack of bodies, and if you finish up with this guy, that is quite the surprise. So he has some potential for surprise. Unfortunately, the 3-drop Aladdin is so bad that in constructed format, the surprise factor is pretty much gone. I think they can safely assume that once you get 5, this guy is a possibility to be coming down. But I like him. I think he's fringe constructed playable. Definitely a huge limited bomb, though. This guy is probably the best card we've reviewed so far in red for limited format. But it's kind of tricky to pull off. Just be careful that you're not getting only 1 exchange out of him. You really need to get 2 to make this guy really worth that 7-drop spot. Now, the other 7-drop here is Captain Hook. He's, again, a 5/5 for 7, but he's not inkable. He delivers 2 lore, just like this guy delivers 2 lore. He's got rush. This guy has pseudo rush with the shift. And then we got the ability to Coward when this character is exerted. So anyway, this guy gets exerted. Opposing characters with evasive gain reckless. We just talked about how there aren't that many characters with evasive in this game right now. This guy's ability revolves around your opponent having them and caring that they have reckless now, which is not going to happen very often, which basically means this guy is a 5/5 rusher with 2 lore generation and 7 and uninkable, which is garbage tier stats for that cost. I don't think he is constructed playable, limited playable. The fact that he has rush, probably good enough, but you're not going to want to put multiple copies if you have them, because 7 and uninkable is a huge issue if you get 2 of these in your hand early on. really clog it up and make it almost impossible to even get to the 7 needed to play him. It takes us to Be Prepared. This is another 7-drop that is uninkable. Also a song, not a song that will probably be sung super often, but it banishes all characters. This is kind of the top end of the blue-red ramp decks that are using it to clear the board so that they can start playing their bigger characters. The ones that come in and remove characters from play whenever they come into play. It's kind of their reset, as they don't have a whole lot of interaction on the first several turns of the game. This is how they kind of catch up. Because of that deck and that deck alone, this card is definitely constructed viable. I don't think you play it in any other version of Red. 7 and uninkable is very difficult to get to. If you have not played enough games to realize that yet, it is hard to organically get to 7 in a timely fashion. And then the fact that this one's not inkable would limit itself even further if there wasn't already that ramp deck in existence. And limited, I mean, you probably run this as a one-of, as just a kind of get-out-of-jail-free card if you get super far behind. But again, 7 organically in a limited format is very difficult to do, and you don't want this clogging up your hand, especially if you're ahead in the game. This just becomes a completely dead card in your hand. You're not going to play it and wipe your board if you're winning, which means there's just one card in your hand that's not going to be able to do anything to help advance your win condition at that point. So definitely has potential and constructed with ramp. I think it's pretty limited in that deck, however, and in limited format, you wouldn't make it a high priority, but it wouldn't be a bad card to have a singleton copy of in your deck as well. All right, then we got Mickey Mouse, the Brave Little Tailor. This guy's an 8-drop inkable 5/5 4 lore generating monster here with evasive. Now, they pulled out all the stops on this guy. He is a really strong, legendary character. Unfortunately for Red, like the Red as a whole color by itself is really, really weak. Now, it has some very, very strong individual cards that make it a great splash color for a few decks. Unfortunately, those cards kind of override what this guy can do right now. The ramp deck is really the only deck that could legitimately play an 8-drop. And unfortunately, the ramp decks just got better high-end options. They're playing Maleficent, they're playing Hades, they're playing Be Prepared. They just don't have room for this little Tailor here, despite how good he is stats-wise. Now, if we get a deck in the future that can really benefit from these evasive characters or some way to get this guy into play, now we talked about like a Reanimate potential deck in the future in regards to cards like Maui and King Triton. This guy could definitely go up in value. Now, he's the only legendary Mickey Mouse we have, so I would imagine he'll be highly sought after regardless. But right now, he just doesn't have a home in constructed play. Now, in limited, this guy is a huge bomb if you can get him into play. Again, 8 is very hard to do organically. So if you don't also play blue to help ramp into this 8 cost, it's going to be hard to get him into play. He is inkable, though, so very little risk in running him in your deck. But again, strong, very strong card once he gets in play. Very few cards that deal with him because he can't really be challenged by there are no other cards that can challenge him directly in a 1-for-1 exchange. So you really just got to hope that you have, your Dragon's Fire or your Let It Go to deal with him in limited, or else he's just going to run away with the game. And we got Scar. We talked about him a little bit early on as well with the smaller Scar. We have the big one here is 8-drop uninkable, which is almost a death sentence in and of itself. 6/6 1 lore generator, 8-drop with 1 lore generation. Like, this is what Red does to their characters. He's got shift 6, so he can come in 2 turns early. Not that substantial. 6 is still pretty late game for a 1 lore generating card, but he does have the ability Rousing Speech. When you play this character, ready your characters with cost of 3 or less. They can't quest for the rest of this turn. So this ability is really just not even good. Like, even if everything goes well, you play your lower drop Scar and you ship this guy in on curve on 6 for your 6/6 body with rush effectively. Like, how many 3 cost or less characters are you still going to have in play on turn 6. I mean, you just got rid of one of them to shift into here. I'm like, 2, 3 if your opponent hasn't traded with anything. And we're in red, so you don't have a ton of lore to, gather before you open up and challenge with them. And at that stage in the game, you're challenging with 3-cost characters onto a board full of probably 5 and 6-cost characters. Like, how favorable are those trades going to be? Like, this card design just makes me think they play tested some really weird decks whenever they were designing these, to where they're like, this ability is really strong. We need to make sure that it's behind something like really prohibitive so it can't be broken. This ability is not good, and this character's stats are not good, and he's not inkable. I don't think you play this guy in Constructed ever. I mean, I really don't even see a format developing where this guy is your go-to 8-drop, especially not being inkable. And man, you would have to be playing so many of the bad scars to even want to play this guy in your limited pool as well. Overall, just a bad card. I would not recommend playing it in any format. If you got just an absolute ton of these scars and really want to force it, sure, I'm sure it can turn some games around for you, but I'm not a fan of this card at all. And that brings us to our big girl here at the end, Maleficent. She's a 9-drop inkable 7/5 2-lore generator, huge body. She's probably going to require 2 cards to deal with, unless you just have a straight removal spell. 2 lore generations, nothing to scoff at. Helps a little bit to catch up on that blue-red ramp deck. However, her big selling point is this Dragonfire. When you play this character, you may banish chosen characters. She's got the Dragonfire just built into her, come into play. Now, on her own, I don't think she's very good. The ramp deck that she is in, she is an absolute house in, though. She is a 4 of in that deck. The fact that she is inkable is absolutely insane. However, when you come to the limited format, getting to 9 is going to be challenging. Does not happen very often, even in the starter deck that has all the ramp cards in it. Getting to 9 is kind of a pipe dream. I don't think she's limited playable because of that, but she is an absolute bomb in that particular deck. She will stay relevant because of that. She will be a 4 of. The fact that she's legendary will also make that price pretty high, and a popular character to boot. All right, so that is my set review for Ruby. Make sure you guys let me know down in the comment section below what your favorite cards in Ruby are. Until next time, though, guys, Hobby Hero out.